Good morning. Welcome to The Human Author, Episode 9. My name is Jen Cantwell. Today I'm working on the fifth book in my Light Chaser epic fantasy series, which is called The Warning. If you're new here, just a little reminder that you can always show up the next day and just hang out for the first 10 or 15 minutes to hear what I wrote the day before. So you don't necessarily have to stick around for the first hour. While I am hopeful that there will be power tools today, I can't make any promises, so sorry about that. Hopefully they'll be done soon. Before I read my work from yesterday, I wanted to share something with you that I was writing late last night. I recently put up a new blog post about using AI for drafting, but I wrote a little something different last night that I wanted to share, so I'm going to go ahead and read through that. The title of this particular live stream is How I Write Epic Fiction Without AI. So it's not exactly a how-to. So how and why I write epic fantasy fiction without AI. Or rather, why would I ever want to use AI for this anyway? This is how I create. I do everything. I don't want help when I'm brainstorming. I don't want help when I'm drafting. Grammar fixes and editing come later, but when I'm sitting in front of the microphone, it's all me. There is no person or program pointing me in a direction, encouraging action, or even suggesting I take a different direction. I choose the direction. This week, I tried Sudowrite and ChatGPT, and I was very surprised when I didn't feel threatened by the technology. I simply found it boring. Not because I'm better than it. On the contrary, I'm willing to bet that some people would think that what ChatGPT can do is better than my non-AI work. But I want total control. Every look, every breath, every hint of the story from my mind and my experience. I don't want to have new ideas for situations present themselves to me and my process from anything other than my own mind. So how do I do it? On my own, I brainstorm, outline, draft, check grammar, and check typos. The final edit goes to a human. I would encourage anyone listening to this to try these tools, but also to set them aside when it's time to draft. So basically, try both. Just make sure whatever tools you use, you are putting your own heart and soul into your writing. There is no doubt that there are some amazing tools out there, but they don't need to be the end-all of our work. I have been playing around with a couple different programs, and it is pretty amazing what they can do. But I have noticed personally that when I put things into those programs and wait for the program to, come up with the next line or the next story, it's not interesting to me. And it doesn't sound like me either. So I'm pretty sure, though, that is going to change, that things are going to keep progressing, and it's certainly not going anywhere. But for me, for now, it just doesn't interest me, which I was surprised by. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and start reading what I worked on yesterday. Right here. I'll turn off my heater because all I want is extra noise. Okay. The Warning, Chapter 5. We headed out away from the group, and with one last glance back at them, I was comforted to see Brennan was still asleep, none the wiser. Since we'd just been awakened by the group of lawmen, we kept it quiet, and we didn't speak again. The moon had risen and lit our way now. We walked this way in silence for over an hour, then finally stopped for a rest. Have you been back to Eagleview since you left? I asked quietly. Only once, he said. I visited my mother just to let her know I was still alive. You went back to your family after all that? I wanted to make sure she was okay, and I wanted her to know that I was too. Also, she told me a little bit about my father. That's why I haven't been back since. Apparently, he has become close with Zahn, will form on anyone, even friends and family. He has completely abandoned the fruit stand. He gets his money from Zahn now, and he's probably living on the inside of the city, behind the walls. At least, that's what my mother said. This surprised me. I knew Kenneth's father was, generally speaking, not to be trusted, but I hadn't imagined him capable of informing on his own family. If they're inside the wall, you'll never get access to them, I said. My friend Oriana had lived close to the wall, but not quite inside. It had been difficult for me to get near her house, more difficult still for me to help heal her. In the end, her sickness had been too much for me to manage. I thought back to that day, the day blood came to her lips during a coughing fit. That was her last day. I wondered what had become of her family since then. Were they seen as being in the clear by people like Zahn or Kenneth's father? I was willing to indicate it too. If so, it would have been my fault, for I had used my untrained magic upon their daughter, something they always hated. They wanted to follow the law desperately, maybe hoping that if they did, they would have a ticket inside the city. What's your plan now? I asked. Following me is dangerous. You're following me the last time I checked, he said, smirking. He had me there. Still, the threat remained. Take me to the edge of the trees that gets me close enough to the wildlands. You can't come with me. It will mean your death. His smirk increased. You're going to need someone to protect you, even if it's just me and a club. He held up a wooden club I hadn't noticed before. Is that your only weapon? It's been enough to get rid of more than one lawman, he said. There's something to be said for brute force. I wondered where my old friend had gone. The boy I'd left behind seemed to have been replaced by a man willing to protect those around him. It would be easy for me to send him back to the group once we got closer to Eagleview. You'd be a fool to follow me. I know, he said, but the same could be said of you. He leaned back against a tree, then continued. The lawmen didn't have magic of their own. My people are safe enough, as none of the lawmen have come by have been able to find anyone in the forest with magic. But how do you know? If no one is with you that has magic, how can you say they won't be found? How can you say that they would be found? His smile faded. There was one at the beginning, a boy, one of the kids from the trash field. I didn't know his name, but he had the ability to set fires using nothing more than light from his palms. He was the first one the lawmen found, and luckily for him, we were there with our clubs, no matter how archaic they may seem to you. After that, he ran away. Maybe he understood the danger his presence put us in. In any case, we attacked the man chasing him as well as the sorcerer accompanied him. You killed them both? His gaze dropped to the forest floor, and he didn't answer. I thought I understood why. Does Zahn still have that pool of light? I asked, changing the subject. It could be very useful to your people, as you call them. What are you doing? I haven't the faintest, Kenneth said, but I can tell you that the light chasers have stopped all sales in the market, and most of them have been arrested. This fact, knowing that the men I'd idolized during childhood were probably dead, brought anger to me where there had only been fear before. Suddenly, I didn't care about the light. What I cared about was whether my father, grandmother, and Regan were still alive. The more I learned of their plight, the less hopeful I became. Would there be nothing left? Why have you stayed so close to home? I asked. Why not just move on? Kenneth shook his head. Everyone who left, all of us, has our own reason to stay close by. Some have family, like me, and others have treasure left behind. What kinds of treasures? Well, Naim had a cache of gold. I know that, but he's no fool. He knew not to bring it with him. We were able to escape in the dark of night, but gold is heavy, and our lives were on the line. The sun was beginning to rise out along the horizon, and I was growing tired, not to mention hungry again. We should stay here, I said. Can we rest? Kenneth looked out over the grassy fields and then relented. Not for long, he said. An hour, and then we can move on again. I laid back, leaning my head against my pack for a pillow. Now I was nearly as tired as I had been before that dinner the night before. I closed my eyes, thinking about the trials that lay ahead. No more light. If it was true, and Zahn had no more light, then my decisions would be made for me. But as I thought about my father, about how his life had been ruined by his trade as a chaser, I knew that I had to stop. There's no place for this anymore. So I turned over onto my side and resolved to stop seeking it out entirely. Maybe in battle, things might change. But this wasn't a battle we were about to walk into. It was something different, and I knew that in the end, it would be me against Zahn. If anyone else still stood to fight, I supposed that Kenneth's people would take care of that battle. But for me, the more I learned about Zahn, the more desperate I was to find him and make him pay for everything he'd done, whether under Torrens' watch or not. I woke up to Kenneth shaking my shoulder. Had it already been an hour? I turned over, this time knowing that silence would be required. He was looking out into the trees, alarm on his face. Is it them? I asked quietly. Did they find us? Because of me? Carefully, we stood, grabbing our packs and getting ready to flee. We'll have to be as quiet as we can, Kenneth whispered. Luckily, horses make more noise than humans do. Come on, let's go. We took off quickly, winding our way through the trees, and I kept my eyes on the valley beyond, searching for the threat. Then, when Kenneth indicated we should stop again to listen, we crouched down low together to search for our pursuer. Sure enough, 3 horses and 3 lawmen were headed in our direction. I'd frequently wished that I'd learned how to hide myself magically, but that was a trait that few sorcerers had. At least I'd never seen it myself. As we sat there quietly to run, I heard something not in the field, but in the trees. I turned around, scanning the woods for the threat, and then I found him, Brennan. I moved to stand up, but Kenneth grabbed my hand and pulled me back down. I had to settle for turning my head and making a slashing motion across my neck. He understood and crouched down himself. For a moment, I thought we were in the clear, but then, far in the distance, I saw another rider. And this one I thought I knew. What seemed like ages ago now, I'd name. She had been one of Zahn's pupils, running with Aaron and her followers. They must have broken apart before Aaron fled the kingdom. I didn't know how strong her power was now, but if what Kenneth was saying was true, we were in big trouble. We have to get back through the trees, I whispered. I know her. Kenneth didn't require telling twice. We both stood and turned away from the field, running as fast as we could, as quietly as we could, deeper into the forest. As I passed him by, I grabbed Brennan's hand and pulled him after us. He gave a little yelp, and I turned back to shush him. It was then that I saw Name coming after us. Zahn must have taught her and the others his talent for tracking. I'd known other trackers, had been taken by them in the wildlands. Perhaps Zahn hadn't taught her himself, and had just left her to the desert to learn on her own. Well, she had learned all right. She was getting closer now, and though I could see her horse clearly, the 3 of us trees waiting quietly. Just as she was about to pass us, just as I was about to throw a curse in her direction, I was surprised when Kenneth jumped out from behind his tree and hit her in the shoulder with his club. She fell from the horse, yelping in pain. But whether that was real or not, I wasn't sure. Some sorcerers had the ability to cloak themselves in a bubble of safety, a hard shell to protect them and their abilities. I wondered if she had been protected just now. I made a move in her direction, my hands with fire, but Kenneth beat me to her, his club raised. Then her voice. Don't, she said, her tone begging. I came here to warn you. I walked up and stood over her, tossing the fire back and forth between my two palms. Kenneth put his boot upon her chest. "One move," he said, "and I'll smash you flat." But she just turned to me, and it became obvious that she had no such protection as I'd feared. She clutched onto her shoulder, but it wasn't enough to keep her from speaking. "He's coming," she said. "He knows you're here." I shook my head. "How?" "The lawmen from last night. They figured it out." But this didn't add up. If the lawmen had found our hiding place, why hadn't they done anything about it? "I don't think that's true," I said, approaching her. I stopped with my boot next to her head. She looked at me sideways, desperation growing on her face. "It is, I swear," she said. "If you know so much, tell me where my family is," I said. "Are they still alive?" She shrugged, then winced at the pain in her shoulder again. "I don't know. They're down beneath the city, but many of the people have died down there. Zahn doesn't let us get too close." "You're lying," Kenneth said. "You know exactly who's down there." She looked at me, her eyes pleading, but just as I thought she was going to start begging again, she lit her own hands and got ready to throw a jolt of it in my direction. She was too slow, though, and I hit her first, directly in the chest this time. It killed me, her eyes wide open with shock. Kenneth took a couple of steps back and stared at me in disbelief. "Why did you do that? We could have found out more." "Did you not see? She was about to attack us, and—" "That doesn't matter," he retorted. "She would have reported back to him. That's true, but it's not very often we have someone under our control, someone on the inside. This was wasteful." He kicked her in the side, clearly angry, but she was beyond. Suddenly, I felt that now familiar feeling of shame. It crept up my neck and made my cheeks hot. Had it been a mistake? Had I become a monster? I didn't know what else to do. She was ready to attack. Didn't you notice? He looked like he wanted to scream at me. But he spoke in a quiet voice. "Of course I noticed. Do I look like a total idiot? You need to learn how to hold back. Was this guy, this kid, chastising me for saving his life?" "Easy for you to say, walking around with that club," I said. But then I thought maybe he was right. Maybe I was always too fast, always jumping ahead and right into the fight. I felt something on my fingers, then turned in a flash, ready to do that very thing again. But it was only Brennan grabbing my hand. "You scared me," I said angrily. "Don't sneak up on me like that." "That's what I'm talking about," Kenneth said. "If you can't get a handle on yourself, we will lose." "And what exactly do we stand to lose? What is this fight for?" He crossed his arms and looked down at me. "It's the fight for the city, or at least what remains of it." His words made me think of crumbling walls and out-of-control sorcery. I wondered how many others were down in the dungeons. The thought made my stomach turn upside down as I realized Kenneth's intention. If you intend to take back the city, it's going to take more than just you and me. And if you intend to go back to, you're going to need me and my club. You and I can figure out what to do when we get closer. But until then, keep your fire to yourself. All right, moving on to chapter 6. Let me get over to the right document. And there we go. I was still just as exhausted as I'd been the night before, the adrenaline having drained out of me, period. I looked down at Brennan, Brennan, but he just stared ahead blankly, period. New line, open quote. "Why did you follow ? Question mark, close quote, I asked, period. Open quote. You could have died just now, period. It was a stupid thing to do, period, close quote, new line. He looked up at me and frowned, period, open quote. What else was I supposed to do, question mark. I can't stay with them, period, close quote, new line, open quote. Why not, question mark. And what Egan, question mark. Where is she, question mark, close quote, new line. Open quote. I don't know, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. She followed Egan when they took him and your grandmother, period. She made me hide in the closet in your grandmother's flat, comma. So when they came, comma, they didn't see me, period. Right before they opened the door, comma, Regan had taken me by the shoulders and made me promise to leave the city and look for you, period. She told me that you could protect me, period. Close quote. He looked up at me, comma, sadness in his eyes, period. Open quote. Was she right? Question mark, close quote, new line. I was forcefully reminded of my experience with Quinn, comma, the way that he had been my charge, comma, my job to guard against the evil Torin ripped, period. Quinn had been younger than Brennan, comma. But right now, Brennan seemed to be the young one, period. He was only 12, comma, check, period, comma. Not quite old enough to travel on his own, comma. And yet Regan had sent him after us, period. If only she'd realized what a difficult errand she was sending him on, period. New line, open quote. I'm glad I finally found you, comma, close quote, he said, period, open quote. Even if you're mad, period, close quote. He looked up at Kenneth, period, open quote. Thanks, comma, I guess, period, close quote, new line, open quote. Kenneth glared down at him, period, open quote. I don't need a stowaway on this journey, period. You must go back to the others, period. It's not safe for kids, period, close quote, new line. I laughed at this, comma, then quieted myself when I remembered there were still 3 lawmen out in the forest, period, open quote. For kids, question mark. We're kids, period, close quote, new line. He shrugged, period, open quote. Maybe, comma, but it doesn't feel that way anymore, comma, does it, question mark, close quote, new line. He had me, period. But my loss of a childhood seemed to date back several years, comma, not just a few months, period. New line. open quote. Case, comma, you can't send him back, period. Comma, close quote, I said, period, open quote. What if he gets lost? Question mark, close quote, new line, open quote. He won't, period. Will you? Question mark, close quote. He looked down at Brennan, period. New line, comma. But Brennan looked right through him, period. New line, open quote. When they left me behind, comma, it was all I could do not to be caught by the lawmen, period. We'd only been there for a couple of weeks before it happened, comma. So not that many people knew about me, period. I think Egan understood, period. Close quote, new line. He released my hand, comma, looking down and wringing his together, period. Open quote. Regan, ... I can't believe she, M dash, close quote, close quote. She was just trying to protect you, comma, close quote, I said, period, open quote. But I think Kenneth is right. Undo. But Kenneth might be right, period. If you come with us, comma, it could turn into a huge mess, comma, and we won't be able to protect you, period, close quote, new line. Open quote. I know, comma, close quote, he said, comma, staring at the ground, period. Open quote. But if I'm going to die, comma, I want it to be with my sister, period. Close quote, new line. I felt like I'd been hit in the chest when he said this. Undo. Comma. His words so sad, period. When I thought about all the things, comma, all the ways Torin had managed to hurt people, undo. The children who lived in our lands, comma, it made my blood boil, period. New line, open quote. Fine, comma, close quote, I said, period, open quote. You can come, period, close quote, new line. Open quote. Just a minute, comma, close quote. Kenneth said, period, open quote. He's gonna slow us down, period. You know that, period. Close quote, new line. Open quote. On the contrary, comma, he's the one who kept us alive the last time we met, period. He can find food for us, comma, and run fast, period, close quote, new line. Close quote. I looked Brennan in the eye, period, open quote. You realize you won't make it. Might not. Period. Close quote, new line. He shrugged. Period. Open quote. I might not make it anyway. Period. And the same goes for you. Period. Close quote. New line. Open quote. He's coming with us, comma, close quote, I finally said, period. New line. Open quote. You can't do this, comma, close quote, Kenneth said, comma, clearly irritated, period. Open quote. I won't allow it, period. I am dash, close quote. Close quote. Open quote. Won't allow it, question mark, close quote. I scoffed, period. Open quote. Just who do you think is in charge here, question mark, close quote, new line. He raised his club, comma, not to threaten me, comma, but to show me his strength, period. New line. In return, comma, I conjured a little lightning in my right hand, comma, then started playing with it, comma, sending it back and forth against a tree, period. New line, open quote. Fine, comma, close quote, he said, period, open quote. We can go together as a team, period. Will that do, question mark, close quote. New line. I sighed, period. Open quote. I'm not looking to outrank you, period. But I know this kid, semicolon. He deserves better from us, period. Than just hiding him in the forest, period. His sister, ... she's special, period. She was sort of reborn from a pool of light after everyone was certain she'd been dead. Killed, period. She's much different now, comma. And I'd be surprised if she were not able to escape the dungeon on her own, period. Close quote, new line, open quote. Do you really think so? Question mark, close quote. Brennan said, period. New line. I looked down at him, comma, and I couldn't help the sadness on my face, period. Open quote. I don't know, period. But I do know you're not going to get anywhere without us, comma, and neither are you, period. Close quote. I said to Kenneth, period. Kenneth blew out an angry breath, comma, then finally turned away from me and made his way deeper into the forest, period. New line. When he didn't stop walking, comma, I jogged to catch up with him, period. New line, open quote. Where do you think you're going? Question mark, close quote. I asked, period. Open quote. What about us? Question was quote, new line. He was making more noise than was wise, comma. His boots hitting the dirt. Footfalls. Slightly, undo. Only slightly muffled by the dirt, comma. And he was walking fast, period. New line, open quote. We need to go deeper in, comma, close quote, he said, period, open quote. We should hide during the day, comma, then walk at night, period, close quote. He looked behind him, comma. And when he saw Brennus, comma, he groaned, period, open quote. I still say this is a terrible idea, period, close quote, new line. I chuckled, comma, I couldn't help it, period. I was the type of person who always seemed to have plenty of terrible ideas, period. New line, open quote. We'll be okay, period. Once we find his sister and my father, comma, we'll have a much better chance at fighting for the city, period, close quote. New line. I wasn't lying, comma, exactly, comma. But it was the only thing I could think of to do first, period. We would liberate them, comma, and hopefully it would result in a cascade of fighters to take on Zahn, period. New line. Open quote. This should be okay, comma, close quote, Kenneth said, comma, pointing at a small group of trees, period, open quote. It was obvious he was upset, period. New line, open quote. Are you sure you want to come? Question mark, close quote, I asked, period. Open quote. You don't have to, period, close quote, new line. He didn't answer me, comma, just shook his head and sat down with his back up against a tree, period. New line, open quote. We should rest here, comma, close quote, I said to Brennan, period. Period. Open quote. We've been going all night, period, close quote. I peered through the trees, comma, keeping an eye out for those other horsemen, comma. The three showed up with name, period. New line. But the wood was empty, period. New line. I sat down next to Kenneth, comma, then took Brennan's hand and pulled him down next to me, period. New line, open quote. Go to sleep now, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. We'll leave when it gets dark again, period, close quote. New line. Brennan laid down on the ground, comma, but his eyes stayed wide open, comma, looking at the canopy above, period. New line. I couldn't force him to sleep, comma, but I went ahead and lay down, comma, too, period. When I saw Kenneth still sitting, stubbornly awake, comma, I knew there was nothing I could do, period. New line. Open quote. You take first watch, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. But you'll need to rest, comma, too, period. Don't you think? Question mark, close quote, new line. He looked strung out, comma. Strung. And it reminded me of me, comma. Me searching for the one thing I knew would set me right, period. New line. But not anymore, period. I'd made my decision, period. So as I closed my eyes, comma, I focused not on Zahn's pool, comma, but on Zahn, comma, himself, period. Had I undo. And I found myself eager to find him, comma, to put him down, period. New line. Had I become a murderer, question mark, a monster, question mark. I still wondered if, comma, when we found her, comma, Regan would be able to see right through me, period. But that was a worry day, period. Page break, period. I woke up to the sound of Brennan crying, comma. And for a moment, comma, I got ready to fight, period. Then, comma, I realized he was still asleep, comma, crying from whatever dream he was having, period. I reached out my hand and brushed the hair out of his eyes, period. Undo, comma. But he didn't wake, period. I sat up, and saw Kenneth, comma, who looked terrible, period, new line, open quote. It's your turn, comma, close quote, I said, period, open quote. You need rest, comma, too, period, close quote. New line. He shook his head, open quote. I can't defend you if I'm asleep, period, close quote. New line. I laughed, period, open quote. Do you really think I need to be defended? Question mark. Have I not shown you the power I have? Question mark, close quote, new line. He shrugged, period. I guess, comma. But when I saw you walk away that day, comma, I, M dash, close quote, close quote. Were there, question mark. When Zahn attacked me, question mark, close quote line. Open quote. Of course I was there, semicolon, everyone was, period. And I can say, undo. And most everyone was sorry to see you go, period. Zahn must have realized this, comma, as it wasn't long after that he began rounding people up, period, close quote, new line. This was a revelation for me, period. Kenneth, comma, my old friend, comma, looking out for me, question mark, new line, open quote. Has it been this whole time? Question mark, close quote, I asked, period. Open quote. Did it start that day? Question mark, close quote, new line. Open quote. It only took a few days for him to come up with whatever plan it is he has, period. Plan. It. It wasn't long, period. Undo. Then, comma, it was only a matter of time for him to rally those, undo, supporters, period. Close quote, new line, open quote. How many were there? Question mark, close quote, I asked, period. Open quote. I don't know, period, period. Question mark, close quote, new line. This took the wind right out of me, comma. And I tried to imagine half the kingdom under lock and key, period. I couldn't help but wonder who was feeding them, comma, if anyone, period. New line. Come on, comma, close quote, I said, period. Oh, quote, you need sleep as much as anyone, period. I'll keep watch, period. Close quote, new line. He peered out from our little hiding spot, comma, scanning the woods for a threat he hadn't yet seen, period. New line. Open quote. I don't think there's anything out there, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. And I'm not helpless, period. Trust me, period. I'll wake you if anything happens, period. Close quote. New line. Finally, comma, he relented and lay back in the dirt, period. Open quote. Just an hour, period. Close quote. New line. I raised an eyebrow, comma, open quote, period. Open quote. Only an hour, question mark, close quote, new line, open quote. Promise me, comma, close quote, he said, period, open quote, new line. I sighed, comma, irritated, comma, but then I my head, period, open quote. You're the leader, period, close quote, new line. And finally, comma, he closed his eyes, period. Page break, period. That, comma, and the few that followed, comma, we made it a point to travel in the dark, period. It didn't take more than a day for us to make it to the end of the trees, comma, and after that it was open grassland, followed by desert, period. New line. I knew how to put up a shield, comma, was ready to defend us with one if necessary, comma, but we didn't see another soul on our journey, period. Ed, comma. Of searching for threats on the horizon, comma. While I saw something I didn't expect, comma, something I'd forgotten about, period. Colon. The tortoise, period. New line. My heart leapt at the sight, comma. Sight. Of him in the distance, comma. An enormous round hill. Blocking the view to the wildlands beyond, period. It was all I could do to keep myself from running, period. something that was easy to do when the moon was high, comma. To him, period. New line. Kenneth seemed concerned, period. New line, open quote. What is that thing? Question mark. Chloe asked, period. New line, open quote. It's a cap keeper, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. He'll have light for us, period, close quote. New line. Open quote. Okay, I'm going to end a couple minutes early today because my kids' school is calling and calling and calling. Thank you for joining me. I will be back here tomorrow for episode 10, and I will be reading this back at the beginning of the episode, so you only need to stick around for the first 10 or 15 minutes. Have a great morning. I hope that your day brings you something awesome.